Hello and welcome back to Easyweb Tutorials. Today we have a short guide on how to create a news archive on our site. As usual, I have Klaus and Niklas with me today, and we'll jump right in with navigating to the studio. So here in the studio, we can see that we have our news module, and inside we have a view that is called module and a view that is called news. And if we click on the module view, we can see that it is completely empty for now. So here we're going to start populating it with some data. But first, we need to create files in our project to correspond to the module and the views. So we go into our project in VS Code. We click the views folder, and here we're going to create a new folder, which we will name news. And the reason we name it news is because our module is named news. And if we go back to the studio and click the little pen beside the news module,
Sorry.
if Niklas clicks, the pen above. Here we can see that we have a key for our whole module, which is news. So this key will search for a folder in our project, or the framework will search for a folder in our project with a name that corresponds to this module's key. And that is how it will find the files that will render the content. So since we've created that folder, we now need to create some files. So we'll go back to the studio to our module view. And the module here, it will represent the landing page for our whole news module. So this is where we will put our article archive. And as I mentioned before, we also have the news view that corresponds to our singular news items. But we create a new file here that is called module.cshtml and news.cshtml.
And I'd like
Perfect.
to notice that this is by naming convention. These names that in the files we created will be resolved to the keys in the studio. So the naming convention of the file you create will be resolved to the key selection of the news module in the studio. So module has a special key called module. So every time you create a root archive, you can always name a file module.cshtml, and that'll map automatically against the view in the studio. And as the module for the standard page, the module is called news. So the default page will be called news, and that's why we named it news.chhtml in Visual Studio Code.
And now when we have created our two files here that will render the data, we're going to start up our project so we can see our site. So we'll start it up by using the terminal as usual. So we open the terminal in VS Code. Niklas is using a short command, but if you don't know the short command, you can go to view terminal. So here we type .NET run to start debugging our project. And when the project is running, we can click on the localhost URL to open up our site. Fantastic. And here we have our start page. And if you remember from the last video, we have our 3 news articles here. And we can click into one of these articles. And now we can see that this view is completely broken. And that is because we've now created a file that will try to render our content from this article, but the file is completely empty. So now we're going to add some HTML code to render our news article. Niklas will start here by typing a section. He'll creating a section tag and then a div tag. And he'll be using Bootstrap classes to define his styling. If you're familiar with Bootstrap, you'll feel right at home. If you're not, then Bootstrap is a very common framework used for CSS. And there are a lot of great guides on how to use Bootstrap online, but we'll be just using the most simple classes to define our grid system. So here we can see that inside of his column div, Niklas has created the div that will render our content, and he's put an ev4 tag on it. And then, since if you watched the latest video, we want the key to our to the specific content that we want to render out, we can go into the studio. We see here that we have a key we don't have a key for free text. So here we can right away specify up a key here for the free text, which we will name to free text. We'll save that view. So now we have our key for the free text. We will specify that key in the ev4 tag. And then when we reload our page, we will see that the content from the free text is showing. Perfect. But if you remember how the news article was built, we also have an image that we want to render out on this page. So we can see that we have image news as a key, and that's that image right up on the top. We'll be creating another div as another row in our grid system, and then a div for our column in that row. And inside of this div, we will put our image tag. And here we will use another tag helper from Easyweb, which is called ev4src, and that is to render the image with the source from our specific image. So we have image news as our key here. And now when we reload our page, we can see that our image will show, and there it is.
Do note that EV4 in its common sense usage as an attribute renders the content from Easyweb inside your HTML tag. But EV4 can also be used on the most of the normal HTML attributes. So when we use EV4 source, you can think of it like connecting the source attribute of the image element to Easyweb. So that's why we also have EV4 href on an anchor tag and similar. So that's how you can see how the system maps together.
And if we inspect our image, you will see we have the source tag. Or attribute, I mean.
Perfect. Now we only have one more thing that we want to render out in our news page. So if we go into the studio again, we can see that we also have our preamble, which has the key ingress. So we'll be creating another row and another column. And inside of this column, we'll be creating a p tag, and we will have an ev for ingress here. But since this is a preamble, we'll change the p tag to an h2 tag, and we'll also style it up with some CSS classes. And when that's done, we'll continue. So that is our news page done. Now we will navigate over to the module page, because now we want to build an archive that lists out all of our news articles. So here in the studio, we will be creating a list that is based on all of our news articles. So Niklas here, he can go to the search, and he will search for a list, and here we can find a view list, which is what we'll be using today. So this is a view list. It will list out views, and we can put a custom key on it to render it out. News list, for instance, and we'll save our view here. We'll also need to go into the settings of this list. So we can open the settings, and here we can define what type of views that we want this list to be rendering out. So we can, in the common selection, we can see the option for from modules. And here we can find our news module, which is there. So there are a lot of default modules which you can for now just be aware of that they exist, but we will be deep diving into them in future videos also. But for now we want our news module. And here we can also set a bit of other options like max amount or sort order, but we will be not doing that right now. So we'll click OK, and then we'll save our view. And now we will go into our code here on module. And now we'll be using a special tag helper that is called EWList, which is like a for or a for each loop that will loop out all the items in our view list. So we'll create a section and a row, a container, a row, and a column. So Niklas is going to specify his key here. And inside of our row here, we have the EV list. So this will list out all of the items inside of this row. And for every item in the list, we will create a div with a column or a col class name. So there will be one column for each of the news articles in our list. And here then, we can try to just navigate over to our page first before we've done anything else. And if we take our URL, we can see that we are on news/Easyweb Studio. But if we go into only news, we will be on the landing page for our module. So here's the landing page for our module. And now we can just try to write out hello or something. And when we reload our site, we can see that we get 3 hellos because this loop is going to loop out all of the news list items or all of our news articles. And for each and every one of our news articles, it will render an H2 element with the text hello. Because we have a news list item here, we now have inside of this EWList tag, we have access to all of the properties and keys that are specified for our news page and news articles. So for instance, we can try actually, Niklas, we can try to go over to the news.cshtml file. And we'll just copy all of this code.
With a section also?
Yes, with a section also. And then just paste it in here and we will see there become a bit of chaos on the site. But we will see that for every news item here, it will render out all of these keys for the news item in the loop. So here we have the first news item, and then directly after we have the second news item, and then the third. But since this is an archive, we were not going to want to be rendering out our free text, for instance, so we can remove that div just now. And we'll start by just rendering out the images for our news items. So in here, we just create a, we don't have to create a div, we can just create an image tag. With the key EW for src, and then image, news image, or image news maybe.
I don't remember.
And here we can see we get, yeah, we can see we get a bit of IntelliSense there. So it's image news with the capital I. Perfect. And now when we reload our site, we'll see that all of these 3 images come from the different news articles. And now we also want to have the label for our news items. So below the image here, we'll be using an H2 element to render out the label here for our news article. And the label is a key that is universal for every article in Easyweb. and we'll be rendering out by using the $sign, which we explained a bit about in the last video. So if you're interested in why we use the $sign there, then you can watch the last video, video 2. So when we reload our page now, we will have our Easyweb Studio, we'll have scopes, tags, and attributes. So we get both the image and the label for all of our news items. And now we want to make these news items clickable so we can reach them. And for that, we will wrap both the image and the H2 element inside of an anchor tag. And here we will be using the EW for href tag helper, which is the same as EW for src when we're using image tag, but for anchor tags, as Klaus just said, we will be taking the link to our specific item. So here we'll just use the $sign, which is, it specifies it's this specific news item in the news list that we want to link to. And when we reload our page, we can see that the text becomes blue to signal that we're using anchor signs, and the links also become clickable here, and we will reach the different news articles. The last thing we're going to do today is now we want to be able to reach this archive from our front page. So we can navigate back to our front page or home page just by going to our local host. And on the top of our local host, in the header, we have our menu up to the right. So we have Easyweb documentation, and the first text there, it's home page, but in Swedish. So we will be going into Easyweb once again. And here we can go to the menu alternative in the top. So here we have our menu structure. So we can see that we have these 3 alternatives that are rendered out in our header.
We can
And
also
we'll just
start
be adding
by changing the start sida to.
Exactly, we can change our
on,
Swedish name.
On the pen.
Yeah, so we click on the pen and we'll be changing that to home. We'll add, and then we can save and publish. And when we go back to our site, we can see that it now says home in the header. Perfect. And now we can add a main menu. And we will be taken to our link manager here. We will be clicking on our news module. And then we can select news this folder, which is the landing page for the module. We can see that we all automatically get a link text that says news. We can change that if we want to, but since this is a news archive, it's pretty spot on. And then we'll save and publish once again. And now when we reload our site, we can see we have a new menu option that says news. And if we click on news, we'll be directed to our news archive. That'll be all for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll be right back next week.